spotlight on the business of sport. What actually goes behind the sport itself, the business of sport? What is it? Let's just unpack, and especially now within the COVID space. What is the value? What goes into sports sponsorship? How is media participating and engaging? Are they portraying the sports? And how is everything changing in that? I don't want to go into too much on unpacking the topic. I've got Bongile, who will briefly unpack the topic, but it's just sharing your highlights of what we're going to engage on about tonight. And this month, of course, we are celebrating Women's Month. And from a Lions Cricket family, we wish to wish all our women out there a happy Women's Month. We are definitely at the forefront of ensuring that equity and gender parity is at the forefront of everything that we do from a Lions Cricket family. And to kickstart the evening, I'd like to just recognize the few members who have joined us today. We've got some of our board members, the Lions Cricket board members, who've joined us today. Thank you very much for taking your time out. We've got our CEO, Jonah Leafright, who's also joined us tonight, as well as his management team. Some of our partners, associate partners and service providers, and of course, the naming rights to the Thought Leadership Series, which is the Richfield. And it's Renee, who will be just quickly telling us why they've decided to partner with the Lions Cricket family in hosting these sessions and that. As well as our panelists. I'm not going to introduce our panelists. I will leave that to Dumi to introduce the panelists. And of course, we wouldn't host this session without our esteemed media partners who have truly journeyed with us, supported us in various press conferences, media, and all of these sessions in there. And on that note, thank you very much for always just sharing us and participating in all of these sessions and that. And to all our guests that have joined us, as we say, I'm not sure what that it means. All protocols are observed. Before we start, I'm going to ask everybody to remain muted at all times, but definitely keep your phones on silent. Do tweet and hashtag at Lions Cricket and hashtag engage. If you do want to comment and send a chat, please feel free to raise your hand. Please feel free to submit your comments on the chat box there. Our facilitator will definitely recognize you, and we will allow for a chat and take a few questions from all our guests in that. In terms of the program, we are scheduled to conclude by 19:30. We definitely do keep to our time, so I'm monitoring our time. It's 6:10. We will definitely finish by 19:30. And just the way the program will proceed, I'll hand over to Renee from the sponsor in terms of why the series and why the partnership. After that, I will then introduce Usibongile then to tell us the topic for tonight, just to give us a brief synopsis, the topic at hand. She will then hand over to Utumi, who is our program director, who will then introduce the panelists, and then we'll get into the discussion. To wrap up today's session, I will then ask our CEO, Jonah Leafright, to just sum up the conversations and wrap up, and obviously try and entice you of what's coming next. Hopefully we will then end by 19:30. Without wasting time, let me just hand over to Renee. Renee, please, a word from our partner.
Thank you very much, Wanele. Hello, everybody. My name is Renee. I am the Group Marketing Manager for Richfield, a very exciting brand, and also one that likes not shying away from things, which is why we've decided to partner with Central Alliance for this Thought Leadership Series. And the importance for us is to always have our finger on the pulse with exactly what's happening out in the world, within the industry, and especially within the space of business, entrepreneurship, and technology, which is exactly where we play. We are one of the leading institutions within business and technology in South Africa, and also wanting to branch out within broader continent. And one such course that we'd like to bring to your attention that shows how robust we are as a brand and as an educational institution is our MBA program, which not only focuses on business, but also exposes you to new technologies, which is something we've been seeing in the sporting space as well. Very exciting to see how tech is used not just in the business space, but also broadened out to everyday life, and especially in the one thing that we all love and enjoy most. So we're looking forward to today's topic, and there's a lot that has been buzzing in our minds and everything that has been happening around us through the course this week and the weekend. So it's going to be very exciting to hear what our panel has to say and contribute towards this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you very much for those. I think just from our side on why, just to elaborate on why we started the series, it definitely has been a few years in the making from our side. And this is a journey that Lions Cricket just sat back and said, how do we reimagine sports and the purpose that we serve as a society? You know, taking the lead from the different literatures to say, what is our role in our society other than just on-field purposes and that? But how do we, what can we do more? How do we emphasize and impart knowledge just beyond the on-field activities and that? And it's something that very, very close to our heart, where we are heavily invested in the off-the-field perspective. And when we say off the field, it's both academic as well as the society that we live in and around with. From an academic support, institutions like Richfield have kindly partnered with us and journeyed with us in ensuring that the people that we touch, the players, the staff, the communities that we serve, not only succeed on the on-field space, but from an off-field and academic. As we know, the sport definitely has a limited time span. We then said, how then do we expand that relationship in terms of the player, the staff, on what next beyond the game itself and that. And we're very, very honored and humbled by the partnership that we've shared with Richfield so far and that. And this goes, as I said, not only to players, but to staff, to members of our communities and that. And with us as well, in terms of this, why these series, it also gives us a window into what's next. Let's cast our eye into 2050. How do we envision the future from 2050? And how do we change what we're currently doing now? And what are we seeing in that? For us, we certainly do our own internal research. We do certain surveys internally, but we do like to engage with different stakeholders and partners just to get their sense as well on, please share with us your knowledge and insights on how we can reimagine our future. And when we say our future, it's not just the Lions Cricket, but as a collective, to say as a collective, how do we join hands in ensuring that we do progress as a society? Obviously, our vehicle is sport. That's what we know. So we use sport to change a society, to change economies and that. So in our world, how do we change the narrative in the society using what we know and that? And that's where this series does pay homage and value. This is where we're finding value for us. And I hope for everybody that's connected, we're hoping that by the end of this session tonight, you will gain some aspects, you will know one or two things that you will take away for your own business, for your own purpose, that we can definitely unpack and use in your own world in that. In terms of our next scheduled event, I'm just gonna do a quick throw forward. Our next event is scheduled on Wednesday, the 29th of September, and we are hoping that by then we will be back to level 2, hopefully, touch wood, cross fingers. With that, we are planning a breakfast session, and with that breakfast session, we want to unpack and dissect the topic that seeks to say South Africa is positioned as the gateway to Africa. What does that mean? If you just sit back and think, when we use that payoff line, gateway to Africa, from different industries, if you look at sports, especially from a cricketing perspective, South Africa definitely leads. It's in the top 5 in the world. If you look at rugby, definitely the world leaders. If you look at our banking industry, if you look at the education institutions, definitely world leaders in their aspects, in their right as well. What does it mean? Let's unpack, let's hone in on that to say we are truly a gateway to Africa. So on that, we definitely have a good panelists that are lined up, and it's going to be more than just an hour session. We're going to unpack and dissect that entire session. So please be on the lookout for that invite. We do encourage that you do join us, participate, and send your thoughts and your suggestions on some of the topics and things that you would like us to share within that space in there. In that way, it will help guide not only the Lions cricket, but cricket South Africa, rugby in the world, to say we can't only think of being South Africa's best or domestic, but let's think international. How do we take on the international stage in that respect and that? On that note, can I now hand over to Usbongile just to introduce and just to paint the picture and the synopsis of today's topic. Svosh, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Vanele. It's always lovely to be a part of these sessions. To introduce myself, I am Sibongile Gangxa. I'm a media practitioner and a storyteller, really. And I'm so honored that, Imperial Wanderers, together with Richfield, have trusted me to kind of craft and imagine how these conversations take shape. And to that end, of course, Dumihaso will do an introduction of our panelists, but they've been so incredible to, offer of their time and just their institutional memory in the various, spaces that they play within the broader sports economy and sports conversation. So to that end, today's conversation, like Wanele said, it's about, putting the spotlight on the sports economy, the business of sport as a contributor to the economy, but many other things that speak to the life of our democracy, social cohesion, creating, opportunities for athletes and, sustaining livelihoods and all of that. So we really wanted to put the spotlight on it because, of course, we've had conversations about how the economy has taken strain in the past 18 months or so due to the COVID pandemic. And the sports fraternity would be no exception to that. But like one of them said, in this case, we are honing in on sports and to see how that economy has, been affected, but also what lessons have been learned. In fact, what predates the COVID pandemic when it comes to how we maximize the commercial opportunities within the sports, in the sports sector, and how we reimagine that in light of COVID, from marketing, teams and athletes, harvesting and cultivating talent. Being a connector of that talent to the commercial opportunities out there. And of course, to also, see how those transcend just the game in ways that can really give people, longevity and sustainability. And as far as livelihoods is concerned. So the panel really comprises of these various, touch points within the value chain of sports that can really share some insight and kind of spark some imagination and inspiration on how they're going about it. from a commercial perspective, or, from a corporate perspective, rather, how are corporates, aware of this, and how do they find expression within their support and endorsement of, teams, of athletes, and what relationship that looks like, and how that relationship can be reinforced and strengthened and expanded. But also from the sense of just managing athletes. If you are a publicist or a manager for an athlete, how do you put that athlete's name out there, keep them top of mind, center stage? How do you negotiate those sponsorships and those deals? But the broader conversation really about the intersection between personal finance, wellness, and the bigger economic implications of being in the sports, in sports, in the sporting fraternity. And we'll have that kind of conversation today that kind of helps us achieve some of those touch points that really speak to the broad value chain of the sports economy. So I look forward to it.
Thank you, Swash. I'm not going to waste time. Let me introduce Tumi. Tumi Khatsoe, over to you.
Wanele, a good evening to everyone. As everyone has just mentioned, my name is Tumi Khaswe. I'm going to be the facilitator of the night. And I'm just going to get straight into it so that we don't waste time with regards to the topic that we have at hand. Absolutely interesting times and interesting engagements that we're going to have today. But let me start off by introducing Mr. Zweli Gumede, who is from the Global Sport Business Professional, and he's worked with the likes of brands like Nike, Standard Bank, and the Coca-Cola. He's very passionate about the business of sport. He's actually also a former professional footballer. So I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Gumede. Thank you very much for allowing us to just engage with you with regards to this particular topic that we have at hand. Also, we have Sibabalwa Simani, who is a group CEO of Unorthodox PR. She is the group CEO there, and it's basically the mother company of Unorthodox PR and Unorthodox Sport. And in terms of sports management, she holds the creative mind behind Springbok players such as Makazola Mapimpi and Lukhanyo as the strategic partnerships builder to the two athletes, which is a testament in their recent onboarding as Discovery Vitality ambassadors. Also, as part of the panelists, we have Charlotte Nsubuka Musaka, who's the head of branding marketing at Momentum. And we know Momentum very well. And we know that it has basically showcased its commitment to women through platforms such as the G Sports Awards and also Momentum Proteas Woman. And we also know the campaign She Owns Her Success. So as Wanele and Zbo, they've basically explained the topic for today, and we're chatting all things the business of sports. And I mean, the main aim is basically to just unpack the sustainable growth in the sports economy. And I just want to bring Mr. Gumede in this one, starting off by just asking you about some of those commercial and marketing challenges that face the sports fraternity predating COVID-19.
Thank you for your time. I did try to get my camera up and running so people can see that I'm a human being. I'm here, I'm alive. But I'm going to put it off so that we don't get to use that much bandwidth. The business of sport really is one of the fastest growing in the world. Globally, it's something that, depending on the estimates, you are looking at, but ranges between $650 to $700 billion as an industry. Contributes 3% to global global GDP. Certainly in some of the bigger markets like the US and the EU. In our country, the estimates range between 1.4% to 2% of the GDP coming out of sport. So it is a big industry that employs a lot of people. It is driven primarily by the fact that consumers and fans and people like us who love sport just love the unpredictability of sport, and it's a huge magnet for television audiences, and that's why sports makes so much money from sport. So the truth of the matter, however, is that as we're approaching COVID-19, we already had some really troubled clouds ahead of South African sport. We're experiencing declines in television audiences, which is a worrying sign because the biggest sporting bodies like the PSL and SARU and Cricket SA make anything between 60 and 70% of their revenue from TV. So it's a very important contributor to their revenue. So if fans no longer see sport and watch sport on TV or see it as a priority on TV, then it's a big worry for someone who contributes that much to their revenues. The attendances were very pure across sports, whether you're looking at football or cricket, which I got involved with a little bit as part of the panel that awarded or that recommended what bids were to be awarded to for the Mzansi Super League, or even rugby. Across different sports, the audience, the attendances were going down, and it is well established and well known right now that participation in this country in sport is one of our biggest areas of weaknesses. So yeah, so those three for me are the three big warning signs that were flashing before COVID even hit. We obviously also did have ongoing leadership and governance failures in our leadership structures and organizations that were unhelpful as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gumede. And I just want to bring in Sibabalwe over here in terms of obviously what you've touched on and just predating COVID-19, but now with COVID-19, what are some of the lessons can one take that you'd say you want to take as solutions moving forward in terms of the challenges that we had predating COVID-19 and now that with the pandemic that we have right here, what are some of the solutions that you'd feel like, I mean, we saw these challenges and COVID-19 came, something else arose, but we have some solutions that we can use moving forward?
I'm just going to follow suit here and just switch my video on, but then off again, just so you guys can see that I'm human. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me into this session. As mentioned, my name is Sibabalwe Esmani, and I'm the Group CEO of Unorthodox Group. So I think with there's some very valid points that Mr. Gumede touched on that even though they might have caused further problems, I think during the pandemic, but they've also solved a lot of solutions. I think with the pandemic, we've seen across all industries that we had to be creative in how we market. So I'm speaking specifically from a player's perspective, that, you know, Mr. Gumede did highlight that people are not in stadiums anymore, and a lot of TV is losing revenues because people are just not watching. But a lot of brands have had to be creative in how they market. And we've actually seen during the pandemic, or I think when we started our companies, that a whole lot of brands were very open to using individuals and players as sort of walking billboards. So in as much as people are not in the stadiums, but when we did come back to either rugby and to soccer, when they were allowed to play, a lot of people were being used as walking billboards. So in as much as there were those problems, but there were quite a few solutions that came out of it as well. So that in itself opened up another totally different industry altogether, or further maybe made bigger what was already being done out there that very few companies were doing. So, but then that also comes with its own complications and problems in the sense that how do we now turn a human into a human billboard, and then how do we almost manage them and their behavior so that it's not detrimental on the brand? Because it's a totally different case now if you're putting advertising towards a stadium rather than putting advertising on a human billboard, because people tend to get involved in scandals as well, especially if we look into sports. So there are quite a lot of problems, but there are so many solutions that we've had to be flexible with. We've had to literally use, sorry about the background noise, guys. I'm in the middle of the bush. So you'll just hear people from time to time. So in as much as there were those problems, there were quite a lot of solutions that came about that I think gave a lot of corporates with the limited budgets or the decreased budgets that they have more room to sort of market and put out their brand awareness. So I think I'll just cap it at there for now.
Well, thank you very much. Just to bring Charlotte into the conversation. I mean, Charlotte, you are head of brand marketing at Momentum, and earlier on I just mentioned some of the various platforms you guys are involved in with regards to sponsorship. Can we start from the beginning in terms of you just explaining to us what do you guys look at when you're saying you are about to sponsor someone or a team?
Or a team. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, my name is Charlotte Mukasa, and I head up the Momentum brand marketing team. So it always depends on the nature of the sponsorship. But if we're to, let me use an actual use case so that I land the points home and I'm practical about what I'm talking about. So we currently sponsor the Momentum Proteas. They are, when we first met them, they were an amateur team. They were not salaried, had no kit, had no money, typical of a team starting out, especially when it comes to women teams. They're not necessarily as easily sponsored compared to their male counterparts. So what did we look at? We looked at their potential. We looked at their talent on the field. We looked at who is currently sponsoring them versus who has already sponsored them. And we found that in the case of the Momentum Proteas, nobody had sponsored them. And we looked around the world and we said, how is it possible that a national asset has no sponsor? It makes no sense. So we then considered them because they had never been sponsored. We considered them a national asset. We felt we wanted to do something for women and contribute to the conversation of women. And when it comes to women athletes in this country, we feel that not enough is being done. And even as Momentum, we've been with them for about 8 years. Obviously, all of them are all salaried and sponsored and playing in different leagues in different countries at different levels. And they are the number 2 ranking team in the world. But when we decided to sponsor them at that time, they didn't have all those accolades. So we looked at talent. We looked at who is managing them and how are they being managed. And we also looked at our business strategy and we said, what about our business strategy aligns with this team in terms of our core values of integrity, teamwork, accountability, and so forth and so forth. And we felt, where is it that they can impart on us? It's not always about the sponsor continuously being heroed because we're giving the money. There is something about changing mindsets about when people partner and come together. We have learned so much from the women as individuals. These are mothers, these are doctors that have chosen their passion and are imparting on us, and they're changing how we look at topics like breast cancer or gender-based violence. So when you ask us what we look at, we also look and say at a secondary layer, beyond the sport, what is it that the team or the individual or the organization is already passionate about that aligns to either an existing passion that Momentum has or a future passion that we would want? So I think there are a lot of aspects that you can look at a technical level. There are a lot of things that we can look at a financial level. But I'll end off this way, and we said, but honestly, what difference can we make? And we said, what are we good at? There are a lot of things that we can say we're good at and maybe not so much. We're good at certain things when we partner with others. But the one thing that we thought that we can stand alone on without partnering with anyone on to then offer as a benefit to the Momentum Proteas is money. And it's not just the money, but it's also financial advice. So a part of choosing the Momentum Proteas team was not just to sponsor them financially, but was to look at where are they economically, where are they financially, and then also to open up space and say, what other sponsors could we create space for so they can top up what it is that we're doing, so that we don't constrain them. So there are a lot of ingredients for success, and I don't want to almost perpetuate that there is a formula to it. Each brand and each partnership needs to do the dance year after year after year to refine what it is that they're trying to do together. But I think if I was to sum up, what do we look for? I would say start and find a partnership, an individual or a team where you share the same values. And that's me.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I just want to follow up on what you just said with regards to you guys sponsoring the Momentum Proteas or the Proteas or the Momentum Proteas woman, and hoping that other sponsors will jump along. Did you find that they were open now to start sponsoring this women's team because they saw that a big brand like Momentum threw the weight behind them?
You know what? In theory, we thought that would be the case, but practically speaking, it's not always the case. We find there's an international interest when big brands start backing either local, community, provincial, and national leagues and teams. But there is still, and it's an insight, I guess, that we can speak about later. There is still a natural tendency to sponsor men, not just cricket. I'm talking about various sports disciplines across the country. I was watching the Olympics and I saw tons of sporting disciplines I'd never even imagined. But generally speaking, there is a tendency to first sponsor the men and then the women. So you'd find, even though Momentum was starting to back the women, generally speaking, it is not natural for a woman team to be sponsored first and then the men's team. Normally, the men's team is covered first and then women's teams start to be considered. So are other sponsors interested? Yes, because there is almost like a safety in a credible brand coming in, because you're like, if they're willing to risk it, maybe they've already done the due diligence, so the risk is less. But I do still think we have a long way to go. And I'm owning it. I'm saying we have a long way to go in terms of making sure that women are top of mind when we start considering alignment to business strategies and alignment to sponsorship and partnership strategies, and to think of them first even before necessarily sponsoring men. I don't want to leave here to create a divide that there's a men and a woman issue. I'm merely surfacing the reality, because we want our men to be sponsored. We want our men to fly the country's flag high. All we are asking for is the advancement and the equity of both men and women's sports. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's Wimbledon. When they give prize money out, men and women get paid the same. It is not the case for every single sports discipline out there. So that's why I say that we've still got a long way to go locally as well as internationally. But I mean, if you look at another thing that we sponsor is the Momentum G Sport Awards, and the intention there is to celebrate the strides that we're making. We can't always look and say we're not doing enough. Whatever progress that we're making around this table and across our sporting disciplines, we need to take time out to acknowledge it, celebrate it, and then encourage it so that there's better participation when it comes to gender and equity pay across all sports disciplines for both men and women. So keep trying. That's really what I'm saying.
Mr. Gumete, just bringing you back into the conversation, your thoughts with regards to sometimes or most of the time we get to see women teams and players struggling to get sponsorship. Do you see it as a suggestion that perhaps the stories are not compelling enough to invest budgets into?
Well, first of all, I think just following up on what Charlotte said, and it is quite clear that the brands that are very meticulous about and strategic about how they choose their partners will always get their returns. And I think Momentum should be complimented for their investment in the Protea women and how it's helped them to advance women's sport. The truth of the matter is that today, a lot of the women's sports are standing up on their own. I mean, in some of the countries, in the US, for example, the women's national team is fighting a significant battle of significant impact in global sports, because they are saying to their federation that we are more successful than our male counterparts. We bring in more money than our male counterparts. We therefore deserve to be paid the same, and that is still in the courts and ongoing. So in South Africa, a lot of our women teams are doing really, really well. In football, as an example, I think that South African women's team, Banyana, is going to be a lot more successful internationally than Bafana is going to be for a long while to come. Today, Banyana is ranked 3rd in Africa, and I think 39th in the world. Bafana is ranked 74th, I think, in the world, and 13th in Africa. So as a national team, Banyana is producing some top class players that are now playing in far more higher profile leagues in Europe than the male counterparts. So if you really are a brand and you are looking to build a story for your brand that potentially has a connection with the biggest chunk of South African consumers and women, women's sport is probably a place to be, and certainly you won't be going wrong, because in some of the cases, as we see with women's football, as an example, the success there is going to be a lot more high profile, and it's going to be coming a lot more sooner.
Then just zooming out, what are the key factors that influence where budgets are invested, especially when it comes to sports?
Well, it's the thing that I said at the beginning. So brands are looking for consumers, and they're looking for ways to connect with consumers. And I think one of the things that Charlotte said was brands are looking for properties who share the same values, who share the same passions as their brand. So if a brand, for example, is into advancing society, as an example, if that's what strategically they're looking to do. Now, one of the most powerful ways of advancing society is driving sport on the continent. Is one of the most successful ways of helping women and people get out of poverty and help their own communities. And if you support sport, you are then creating an opportunity for more girls to dream. So brands are looking for properties that would help them push their own agenda. So it's important, therefore, that rights holders like Cricket SA or Gauteng Cricket or Lions Cricket or any of the other rights holders, that they understand what it is that they can do for brands. And when they go to brands, they can say, oh, this is who we are, this is our vision as a business, and we see a connection in what we're doing versus what you are doing. We think that there's a synergy there. So it's important that you do that. But brands are looking for consumers, and wherever consumers are. So something that allows the brands to connect with the consumers is going to be important. Something that allows the brands to access bigger television audiences, bigger engagements, whether you're talking social media or any of the digital environment. If your property is able to drive engagement that are positive, that are likely to see the brand advancing its key attributes and strengthening its health and equity, then as a rights holder, you get brands sponsoring you. So understand what you are offering and how what you're offering is helping the brands meet their own objectives.
And then, Siba, I mean, just talking about what Squilly just mentioned with regards to the brand just expanding their length out there. I mean, obviously, it was a strategic move to be involved with Makazola and Lukhanyo. But talk to us about just that link between evolving an athlete's mindset into being a strategic entrepreneurial thinker and approaching their talent through that entrepreneurial lens.
Cool. So as a sports management agency on the unorthodox sports side, we don't only look after the client's brand, as in right now when they're a professional athlete, but we also help them plan for the future, which I guess separates us from a lot of the customers, the other service providers that are out there. So while they're in their peak, we also start talking to them about their future. So we also do bring in financial and investment advisory services into that, so that by the time they retire as well, they have something to retire to and build on. So it goes back to what Mr. Kumete was also saying, that when we then go out and look for brands to be associated with, it not only speaks to the client, Makazole or Lokanyo right now, but it also speaks to the kind of person that they're going to be when they're off the field. So with a lot of the things that we do and how we align a specific athlete with the brand, it speaks to their core values. So, I mean, in the past, we've seen not just with professional athletes, but with musicians and any individual who's got a large following. It was just about the large following, and that was it. There wasn't any in-depth research to find out what is this person's key. So that's essentially what we do. It process. It's not from the get-go where we say, oh, okay, we can see X, Y, and Z. Through working and interacting with the client, we then get to see what's really, really important to them. So for instance, I'll make an example with Makazol. He's very passionate about sports development. He's also very passionate about gender-based violence and sports development, in a sense that he comes from the Eastern Cape. He's a unicorn, really, to make it that far, coming from a background like his background, and also not playing in a traditionally rugby school, right? But then imagine now if sports development was something that was looked at a bit more intensely and a bit more intentional in certain areas, how many of Makazoles you would actually find. So sports development is a huge thing for him, because he's very, it's authentic. It speaks to him. It's his success story. And then if we look at GBV, he does touch on it, the fact that, in the household that he was raised in, he was the only male. So he saw almost everyone who was living under the same roof that he was also living in being abused or raped. He talks about it quite publicly as well. So because as a child, that affected him while he was growing up, and he felt powerless. Now that he's got this influence, he goes out and he does whatever it is that he can. So there are campaigns that we embark on, but then there are also some things that are done behind the scenes that he doesn't necessarily want to shine the spotlight on. So authenticity and finding out what is important to that individual, and then aligning the brand to that. But then also within our strategy, what we look at is the long term. We don't just want to accept any brand. We want to see how we can grow with that specific brand. And then it goes back to entrepreneurship and business. So on Unorthodox Sport, Mazol is not only a client, but he's also a director. So that also speaks to his sports development side of things. And that also says that while this company is growing and he's on the field, the moment he retires, he has something to retire to. So a lot of also the brands that we interact with, either that come to us or we approach them, we also think, how do we grow with them in the long term, so that by the time he's a full-time businessman, through his endorsement deals that he's gotten, how do they also come on board? So I think the lady, sorry, from Momentum also touched on it to say that it's not just about the brand in itself giving money, but what we do is that we create value for the brand as well. So for instance, say we have campaigns that we already do with ourselves. We don't necessarily wait for a brand to jump onto that. So we then also give the brand value, but then it also goes back to authenticity. If they really do match what our key pillars, what the players' key pillars are, then it's so much easier to include them in campaigns, because there will always be a synergy. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, it's just keeping the endorsements in mind and saying, on a long-term basis, how will my association with a certain brand affect me, and how can I add value back so that we grow with the brand on a more long-term relationship? I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Siva. It really does. But Charlotte, a question to you in terms of, sponsoring a team or working with a player. How much does the results of a team contribute towards the sponsorship of the team, or perhaps a player who used to have a lot of game time and now doesn't anymore? How does that affect the sponsorship?
Teams win and teams lose. It's part of, we call it at high school, we used to call it good sportsmanship. I guess the sportsman would probably be a little bit problematic for me these days, but it's in the essence in that when you lost a game, you still walked over to your opponent and you shook hands. And if you won the game, you still walked over to your opponent and you shook hands. So when teams lose that you are sponsoring, that's when you even need to play a stronger role in supporting them, making sure that they're motivated and inspired, because you don't want them to fear losing a sponsorship because the game isn't necessarily going their way. So very similar to Nike and Tiger Woods, you've got to be in there for the long haul. So as much as the partnership is reciprocal and brands are being built by these credible sports athletes per se, there's something about sticking to the long haul of the partnership, and that's where your values start to bubble up. When teams are losing, you ask yourself, what brought us into this partnership to begin with? Did we have a common cause, and is that cause still there even as the team is losing? Because if the passion is still there, the cause is still there, and your values are still there, irrespective of whether that team is losing or not, as a sponsor, you stay in the game no matter what. And so I can't speak for all other sponsors. They might say, gosh, the fact that this team is losing, we've calculated, return on effort, return on investment. We don't believe that the listeners or the people in stadiums, etc., are now seeing our brand in a positive light because the sports team that we were backing when we started this particular partnership is losing. That is for your PR team to perhaps manage and to find the freaking silver lining in terms of the partnership. I don't support brands that suddenly exit partnerships because teams are losing. I say find the story that sells, that showcases why you started the partnership, find the silver lining, and make sure that you do your part as a sponsor in terms of inspiring and motivating that team into national and international level. And that's just the view that I personally hold. So I know that this is always a contentious topic, even in my own team. I head up a team and we debate it all the time. But personally, I believe that this is, where they talk about the road or the tire hitting the turf, so to speak. I think that's really where you start to test whether the partnership was authentic to begin with. So I say stay in the game, and that's really what I would advise other sponsors as well. And when it comes to losing, I also want to add and say, there's so many aspects to sporting. It's not just about the game. These sports athletes have stories that can still add credibility to your brand, that can still add a return on investment to your brand. Find out who are they off the field, and don't just focus on the bats and the wickets and the goals, etc. There are so many levers to leveraging sponsorships. And if you want to stick in the old-fashioned way of doing things and looking at partnerships from a traditional lens, you will suffer. But if you look at the partnership from a 360 point of view, there's so many nuggets that I believe, even as South Africans, that we have not even begun to mine. And that's just my personal view.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Looking at the dynamic that COVID-19 has brought into everything, but now that we talk about the business of sport, from an innovative perspective, what would you say are some of the disruptive ways we could say the sports economy has employed to sustain itself? And we can look at just the games as a whole, maybe the lower frequency of the games.
So I wouldn't say. Sorry, is that a question coming to me, or is it coming?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
I'm not sure. Is it me? Sorry, I just want. Yes. I didn't mean to hijack, but the question is how are we being innovative considering COVID-19 There are so many ways that we're being innovative. I think the power of storytelling is something we negated before COVID-19. And now that we are all stuck behind computers and trying to keep each other healthy, although sporting codes are getting into training camps and we are able to go into stadiums and or some parts of the world, not necessarily here, but we're able to watch the Olympics in terms of minimal or empty stadiums. I believe that technology is enabling us to connect to our sporting heroes, both men and women, through digital transmissions, through the fact that you can watch games repeatedly over and over on multiple channels, not just TV anymore. And I think that in terms of the quality of digital transmission, it's leapfrogged in the last 12 to 18 months to accommodate us watching to see if that ball really did go over the line. So I think that the technological advances are happening digitally to enable better viewing, anytime viewing, repeated viewing, and that is helping us connect to our sports athletes. I think it's never going to take away from the interaction that we used to get when we used to get signed balls and signed t-shirts and we could hug our heroes. But the time is coming. So I would say that let's continue to leverage the technological advances and keep them, so that when we are able to actually physically engage with our sporting heroes, that we don't lose the momentum that the IT industry is suddenly empowering us from a sporting code point of view. And that's my view before I hand back the mic. Thank you.
Squealy, I'd just like to pose the same question to you. What are your thoughts on this one? Also in context of perhaps the banning of spectatorships at games, the suspension of contact sports during various levels of lockdown.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get to that, but I wanted to just also join in the conversation about the athletes and the importance of athletes, people like Magazola and Lucanio, for example. I mean, today the third most followed or the third highest digital connections in sport. You know what that is? The first two are the two teams from Spain, Barcelona and Real Madrid. The third one is Cristiano Ronaldo. Cristiano Ronaldo is in terms of digital connections globally, is bigger than clubs, is bigger than anything in the NBA, bigger than any other team in Europe. So athletes have become media owners and content owners and platforms on their own, and therefore people like Sababalo have something for brands to start thinking quite seriously about, and obviously they've become a lot more vocal. And then also I want to just talk about a little bit about how when teams lose, brands tend to stay away. When your sponsored team loses a match, you just wish you could bury yourself in the sand. In truth, consumers want to know that you are a sponsor whether they win or lose. And in some of the most iconic examples, when Brazil got beaten 7-1 in the semifinals in 2014, the one brand that had an ad the following day was Nike, who basically said something to the effect that Brazil would rise again, and that was one of the most loved ads in the height of Brazil's humiliation in their own World Cup. So brands should never stay away from losing moments, because there's a story to be told there that's positive. COVID has helped us to pivot, and some of the most iconic pieces of work that brands have done has been in the times of COVID. A study by Deloitte found that there is only about 3% of people who are American football lovers in the US who are ever going to go to a football match, an American football match. So 97% of the fans are unlikely to ever go to a football match. So you have to find a way of staying connected to them. And COVID has reminded us that being able to connect with your fans, even when the stadiums are empty, is even more important, because you know for a fact that the vast majority of your fans actually, even if the stadiums are open, are never gonna be there. So a team like Barcelona says that they've got 300 million fans around the world, as an example, but their stadium only takes 94,000 people, meaning that every time they play, there is 300 million people who want to be engaged and connected to. So you need to find a way of connecting with them, even when the stadium is packed to the rafters. There are people who just simply won't get there because they either are too far or can never get to the stadium in any case. So COVID has reminded us that the vast majority of the people, of our fans, are far enough, and they there. We now have the platforms and the technology to be engaged, and the stories like The Last Dance has reminded us that the game is not just about when the whistle goes or at kickoff, but there's a lot that fans want to know about sport. Between the last whistle on Sunday afternoon and the kickoff whistle on Saturday, everything in between, fans want to know, and those are opportunities to tell the stories, like Charlotte was saying.
Then would you say that COVID-19 impacted on sponsorship values and measurement metrics?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. I mean, globally, sport, according to a study by Two Circles, globally sport lost about 35% of the global value, because the global value of sport comes from television audiences and what sport can deliver there, also comes from the people and attendances. And the fact that we're going to have limited attendances for a significant period of time means that the values that sponsors can command or the values that rights holders can deliver to sponsors are limited. And therefore, sponsors, rights holders need to find other ways to recoup the value, and the digital platforms are certainly one of those platforms. But sponsors cannot continue to pay full values for when the sport is effectively operating at 70% capacity.
Oh, thank you very much. I just want to also take this time to say, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to ask questions. If you have a question over there and you just want to participate in this engagement that we're having, we'd really love to also hear from you and hear some of the questions that you have with regards to this business of sports. Just, Siba, bring you back into the conversation. Let's talk about the relationship between media, rights owners, athletes, and the sponsor. I mean, I remember one example with regards to this one where I think Ronaldo was coming in for a press conference, and at that media conference, they put in cans of Coca-Cola and all these other things. I know it might be a silly example, but he took that Coke and put it down, and when he was asked about it, he was like, no, actually, this clashes with my sponsors. How is that relationship with sponsors and other brands that, you know, perhaps you sponsoring this particular athlete and there's also other brands involved because of the tournament that they are competing in?
Sure, that's actually a very tricky one, and we were having a discussion not too long ago about that, and it was actually on a radio platform as well, but it was on Power FM as well, where they even brought in a lawyer to say, you know, because when a sponsor signs on a player, it's in their individual capacity, and then so there are differences, and you have to distinguish between someone coming on in their individual capacity and then someone coming on as a team. So, for instance, say if someone is sponsored by Coca-Cola and that's the individual and that's the player, in their own individual capacity, whatever it is that they do, they can then fulfill the obligations of their contract. But once they are part of the team, and say the team is sponsored by Pepsi, then that is the team, but it's not the individual that is singled out by themselves. So it also brings in a discussion that we were actually having 2 days ago as well, as to say, we see that sport is very much moving towards an individualistic, and it's moving away from the actual sport in itself, where you see such instances where one individual has so much power and influence, and then they start causing, well, not really causing, but then they start creating those conversations. So sorry, I was just making a few notes when Mr. Gumede and Charlotte were just speaking right now, and I think it also ties in beautifully with this question that you just asked me. So the discussion that you were having about COVID and how that almost affected sponsorship, and also how it affected innovation as well. I think with COVID, I don't know if it was something that was already coming, or if the pandemic accelerated it, like it accelerated so much, but it actually did accelerate innovation. And I think for the first time in a long while, we're seeing that there's a lot of collaboration between sports. So whereas in the past it was just cricket, it was just athletics, it was just rugby, but now we're starting to see that sport in its whole and sport development, there's a bit of a collaboration and coming together. So I would just say, just that question that was posed earlier, that it actually caused a lot of a collaboration between the different sporting codes, in the sense that they're now seen as sports people, and then they combined whatever the sporting code is. And then I think also sponsors are starting to see that. And also another thing that we almost had to wake up to, on top of this, so many changes that we had to make when what feels like such a short space of time, it actually feels like overnight, is that we had to be creative. The traditional approaches to sponsoring someone and saying, okay, here you go, there's, for interest sake, 10 Rand, we are sponsoring you as a company, go to X, Y, and Z. It's just not enough anymore. And with a lot of the athletes taking their power back, I think was something that was alluded to as well. They're taking their power back, and with digital, they're actually creating their own platforms. We've had to look at and maneuver at different ways that now sponsors can sort of market their brands. So I think with COVID coming in, a lot has had to change. And with us going digital, it's been both a good and a bad thing, but I think there has been more good than anything else, because it's allowed us to think outside of the box. So for instance, there's a project that we're currently working on at the moment, called the La Liga Camps, in partnership with IBA Cup South Africa. It's the first IBA Cup La Liga camp, in partnership with IBA Cup South Africa, that's happening, that's focusing on youth football. So with that, and as much as it is strictly about soccer, but we see in our planning, we actually want to involve so many people, because sports development as a whole, I think was touched on earlier, is so important, not just with the athletes, not just with the core team, which is the coaches, but the value chain and exploring that value chain. I mean, I myself can speak and say that I am actually a beneficiary of sport opening up so much more, and including me in the value chain, because now we start seeing a whole lot of more management coming through. Whereas before, management was just an agent getting a contract for one player to another club. But now we see that people are being managed as brands, whereas we didn't see that in the past. There was no special focus on that and aligning a person with a specific brand. But now we are starting to see that. So I think also COVID highlighted the magnitude of the fact that a sport is also another huge means of it should be part of our recovery plan, really. And I mean, for also our IBA Cup La Liga camps, one of the things in our planning session is to just highlight how different players' lives have changed from being involved in sport, and how important it is for us to actually take a closer look at sport. It's not just the players, as I mentioned before. I mean, there are specialist doctors, there are specialist nutritionists. There's so much more that can happen. There's companies like our company, which will probably see so many more companies popping up that take care of athletes' brands. So I think it's also quite important to note that. But I think COVID did highlight a lot of the issues. And just going back to what Mr. Gumede was saying about Charlotte, sorry, not Mr. Gumede, but we need to be non-traditional now in our approaches, and how we actually give value back to sponsors. From the player's perspective, and it also depends on the ROI. What is the client's, the company's ROI? What are they expecting from sponsoring a certain individual? And being realistic about what can be delivered and what can't be delivered. But definitely, we've had to have a good look at some of our contracts and seeing how our personalities can also shine through in those different sponsorships and how we can also add value to those brands.
I mean, we have a comment here from Wanele saying that we are seeing the same results with NBA, where players are driving the engagement as opposed to the sport. Are we seeing a collusion here, and who then leads the discussion? Charlotte, just bringing you into the conversation.
Hi, sorry, could you repeat the question? I only caught the tail end of it.
Oh, Wanele is saying that we are seeing the same results with NBA, where players are driving the engagement as opposed to the sport. Are we seeing a collusion here, and who then leads the discussion?
So is Wandile saying that the NBA players, basketball players that I'm assuming, are driving engagement and not necessarily sports? And what does he mean by engagement? If you can just double click, because there's digital engagement. I just want to make sure I understand the question fully.
Sure, I'm happy to come in there. I mean, if you look at what's happening, especially within the NBA and NFL, there's a move, and this is the comment that Undu's just made now, where we're seeing a major focus towards the sponsorships, towards players, as opposed to the sporting code, the union team itself, and that. And that's where majority of your engagement is coming through. If you look at, and I'll use the NBA examples, the likes of Kobe Bryant and that, really championing and owning the storytelling, the narrative in that space. And some of the brands, the likes of Tiger Woods and that, really being at the forefront of just that engagement and the narrative and, you know, driving the values and the essence of what the brands are looking for vis-a-vis what the players also looking for in there. And then here's me as Wanele, marketing the Lions team, you know, as a collective, saying, I've got a Kagiso Rabada, I've got a Themba Bavuma, and I've got a Lions team. Who do I push first? Do I push a KG first, or do I push a Lions cricket? Who leads the discussion and the narrative in those circumstances?
So I don't think that there's an answer that I can give for every situation. In the case, though, of a basketball, I can give a perspective. Who leads the conversation there? So somebody mentioned it earlier that brands were chasing eyeballs. We're chasing consumers. And to get to the consumer and the eyeballs, we understand that we need a sporting code as a vehicle to get to the eyeballs. So in this particular case, Nike, for example, needs to get to the consumers. The vehicle is maybe less so basketball and more so Kobe Bryant, for example, because I think somebody else mentioned it that Cristiano has more digital followers than clubs, for example. So he's more popular, he's more in demand, which therefore means he has more weight in terms of influencing the masses. So obviously brands are going to pursue the person versus the sporting code, which means that there's a shift that's taking place. So 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you would chase, maybe there was a better balance, and you would chase a basketball as a vehicle to get to your consumer. And now you realize, yes, basketball is the environment, but you actually want Kobe, because Kobe as a brand is the one that is influencing your next consumer, your next client, your next stakeholder, your next decision maker. So I don't want to then extrapolate that thinking and say everything that's happening in basketball would be the same for the Lions club and Kagiso. But if you were to ask my opinion in terms of who is driving the conversation, the consumer drives the conversation. The stakeholder, the decision maker, the person at the tail end drives the conversation. Because you might find, and I won't bring other examples here, when that sporting or sports person makes a faux pas or an error in their ways, that end client is not afraid to take that person or that sports person out by the knees. So they're actually governed by the by the end consumer. So although Kobe may be influencing because he's got power to influence. Trust you me, if Colby is involved in a scandal that doesn't meet the values of your end consumer, not the sponsor, your end consumer is going to lead that conversation. So it's a dance. When it's good times, Colby is leading the conversation. When it's negative times, the consumer or the person that buys the ticket is the one that is leading the conversation. So it's let me leave it as a dance. It's situational, and it depends.
Yeah, I guess we in a chicken and egg scenario at this stage, where
It really is. I don't think there's one answer, because give me a sporting code, give me an example, give me a person, give me a brand, and I'll give you a different answer all the time. It's situational. But at least the good thing about the ecosystem of sports is that we want good to always prevail. And when good is not prevailing, when the impact isn't positive, the ecosystem self-corrects.
I mean, I'm using this example. Just to follow up on that. I'm using this example, especially from a Lions cricket perspective. We obviously, when we go out, we've got our various assets that we take to market, which the key is the talent that we have, as you said, look at the talent. But the asset is still the brand, which is the Lions cricket, history and heritage, and a lot of things that comes with it. And recently, obviously now with the national captain on board, the world #2 player, who do I lead with? Who do I put forward first? Do I say it's the Lions cricket brand, or is it a KG, or is it a Timber? This is where I almost struggle, where I say, I need to find this balance, saying not push this one, because then ultimately the brand will then ultimately say, we actually want the player, we don't want the team. And then if I go the team, we actually want the team, not the player. So that's the dichotomy, and the challenge is that we try and find a balance to say, I need to marry these two so that they all sync in sync. And especially from a rights owner perspective, where there's the talent, there's the rights, there's properties that we're trying to promote. So it's saying we are at this space, at this juncture, where I'm finding this space of saying, let's lead with all three, but having to not to put one first and being the lead.
So I don't know, is that question directed to me? I don't want to hog the mic. I first want to check.
Yes,
I'd love to provide some attention to that. Yeah. Who was the question directed to?
It's just anybody.
Okay.
I want to have a go as well. You can go, Charlotte, but I want to have a go as well.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I'll keep it very short because I've spoken a lot already. I always say, you're as a marketer, you look at your target market. When you are in front of the Lions Club, who goes first, and you put your hierarchy, you've got rules and guidelines in terms of who you communicate, and you have to prioritize. What are you visually seeing first? What are you prioritizing? Because they cannot be 33 and a third percent, 33 and a third percent, and 33 and a third percent. So when you are speaking to people in stadium, what are your rules there? When you're speaking to stakeholders, decision makers at the Lions Club event, etc., what are your decisions there? When you're going onto TV, on radio, so it is situational. And at the end of the day, you look at your client or your target market. Who are you communicating to? Because now, if you come to me at a stadium, guess what? I want the player. But if you come to me as a sponsor, guess what? I want Lions Club. So it depends who you are talking to, and you need to be able to pivot. And almost, we call it shifting feet in terms of who you prioritize visually, in terms of messaging, in terms of language, because what the decision maker wants to hear is not necessarily what the person in the stadium who is buying the ticket wants to see and hear. And so I'll hand the mic over to somebody else.
Okay, so I'd just like to jump in quickly because I think what I actually had to say was very close to what Charlotte had to say, and then maybe Mr. Kumete, you can come in there. We also have to think about the aspect that if you go for an individual player, then it's high risk, high returns. So it's also about the sponsor and how risky do they want to play or not to play. Because as I was touched on before, if something happens and a scandal comes up with a certain player, will they be able to manage it? Are they do they have the appetite for that sort of thing happening? Because you always have to anticipate the worst, right? And then also as a brand or a sponsor, what do you actually want to communicate? What messaging do you want it to come across? And then that'll make you'll then be in a better position to say, okay, we can use this specific individual to communicate this message because it speaks to who they are as a person, their role in order to them getting to where they are. Or yeah, so just the messaging and what you actually want to communicate will be able to help you lead with either a player or either with the club in itself. But what brands also need to realize, and a shift that has taken place, and again has been accelerated by the pandemic, is what are the people on the ground saying? So a lot of the times some brands want to dictate what messaging that they also want to put out there without actually listening and finding out from the fans, the very same eyeballs that brands are after, what do they want? So I think more than anything, brands actually need to form focus groups, get on the ground and listen to what people are actually saying and what they want, and seeing how they can accommodate their marketing strategies to appeal to their fans. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to lose your fan base. You don't want to lose those eyeballs. You want to actually either maintain or increase them. So as Charlotte was saying, it's very much situational. It depends on exactly what the club wants to communicate or what the brand wants to communicate. And then that'll sort of steer you in the right direction. But I think more than anything, listen to your eyeballs essentially, and then find out from them what is the most pertinent thing that they want at the moment, and then figure out how you then communicate with them in that way. But then always, I would like to say, put your fans first and then align them with what you want to communicate.
So I think I just want to add to that, because in essence I agree with what is being said, but I do want to make this distinction that when Kagiso Rabada or Themba Bavuma are playing for the Lions, they represent the Lions. And the Lions is the most important and the first brand. It's what they are almost sub-brands of the Lions organization. When they go to Proteas, they will be sub-brands of the Proteas. So not getting into the message and how the message is delivered and who is being delivered to, it's important that you make that distinction, so that whenever they are in the Lions organization, whatever they do is building to and contributing towards the strengthening of the Lions brand and maybe their own organization. But if it doesn't do anything for the Lions organization and it just builds their brands, then you've lost an opportunity, because when they are with the Lions, they are being paid by the Lions. Their job is to contribute towards the strengthening and the building of the Lions organization and their own brand.
All right. Did you want to say something else, Wanele?
No, thank you.
All right. I think as we're coming towards the end of this conversation, I'd like each and every one of our panelists just to conclude from their different perspective, but also just putting in this question, since while we've been talking about these different clubs and the players, but from a spectator's point of view as consumers, what are some of the ways we can leverage of spectators as contributors to the sport economy? We can start with you, Charlotte.
The question was, what can we leverage? I missed that. Sorry, my connection isn't great.
In terms of some of the ways we can leverage of spectators as contributors to the sports economy?
How can we leverage spectators? I really think that, I'll use a buzzword right now, attention economy. That's essentially what we're buying as sponsors and as brands, is the attention economy. So for as long as spectators are giving attention to cricket, rugby, netball, rowing, the brands will come and they'll follow. So how do we leverage their attention? I think if we make sure that the sport is professionalized if we make sure that the sports are administered and are managed well, the spectators will come, because people want to be attracted to success. You know, they don't want to support sporting disciplines that are shoddy or going by the wayside per se. So I would then say the way to leverage spectators is to keep the game interesting, to keep it managed well, to keep it globally on global levels, on par with global standards, and to keep the competition healthy, and to create an expected rhythm of play. And if you keep an expected rhythm of play, and I think the spectators will continuously commit their time as well as their money, and where there are spectators and where there are eyeballs, we will, as sponsors and brands, naturally come. But I do want to say, for those sporting disciplines that don't yet have the attention economy of spectators, that we as brands and sponsors need to do more to go and reach out into grassroots, to give them an opportunity to play at the levels that we are expecting our spectators to participate in. So it's a double-edged sword. You want to leverage spectators that are in existing sports that are already doing well, and to build on that. But we also have a responsibility in pivoting existing spectators to consider other sporting disciplines, as was seen at the Olympics, so that we as a country don't just stick to, I'm going to call it, the traditional sporting disciplines. We owe it to our women, especially not just in Women's Month, to start to highlight the sports that they are gravitating to. And we also owe it to our men and women who are in less attended sporting disciplines, to make them, schools, young girls and boys aware that they can actually commercialize their talents in sports that are not necessarily celebrated in South Africa, but that there's opportunity globally. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question in terms of how we can leverage it, but I don't want it just to be how do we leverage it as individuals. We have a role as a corporate to do leveraging on both sides of the coin.
Thank you. Tumi has a family emergency, so she asked to be excused. Apologies for that. Can we get Mr. Gumete to wrap up for us, and then we hand over to Siba? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. I wanted to wrap by saying that the sport boardroom it does a lot of work around understanding the insights and the economics of sports. And one of our research that we did last year, we asked some of the leading advertisers in South Africa, what are the key challenges facing South African sport? And they listed 3 things. One was the leadership and governance issues in South Africa. They listed as the second thing, fixing the pyramid of sport development. And the third thing was fan engagement. So in those 3 things, basically the leadership and governance is something that is well known and we've spoken about ad nauseum. But the other one is really about getting more people involved in sport, which is around the pyramid of sport, and making sure that at the bottom, we're getting more and more kids to participate to grow the sport. But all of this really is about the fan. If we need to get to learn to put the fan at the heart of everything we do. I was trained as a marketer by Unilever, who as a business believed that the consumer is the beginning and end of everything that Unilever did. In sport, the fan is the beginning and end of everything that sport does. It's the beginning of how you decide on who is in the team, where your team plays, how you charge for ticket prices, what matches you play, when you play them. We need to find a way of ensuring that the fan is at the heart of how we do and everything that we do. And it is something that is going to continue to cause us a lot of pain as a sporting industry until we get it right. And I get the sense these days that when you look at empty stadiums and television audiences that are declining all the time, that the fans basically are voting with their eyes and their feet.
Thank you. I think my background at the back literally sums it all. It's definitely the fan at the heart of everything. Siba, your final words?
No, definitely. I agree with Mr. Kumete so much. And I think just some of the points I'm going to highlight here actually add on to what he was saying. I mean, how we can leverage spectators, I think, as sponsors and even as players as well, is that we can actually information gather quite a bit. So, in as much as we are putting the interests of the fans right in the center of the attention, there's so much that your spectators can tell you. I mean, we can use them as they're very good leading and lagging indicators, actually. And then that actually helps you. Sorry, I come from a PR background, so I'm always going to go back to a PR and marketing strategy. But as a alliance, say the club, right? You can actually use them in your marketing strategy as well. So I think right now, if we look at some of the fans and the spectators, they require social consciousness, which is something that Mr. Kumete also highlighted to say that people are looking at governance quite a bit, and they're looking at leadership. And fans are being more vocal now because of our technological advances. And if we don't listen to that, I mean, you can lose a lot of spectators as a club if it feels as though you're not listening to your fans and they need and the clarity around social consciousness and how and where a certain club stands. So that can definitely be leveraged. Interact, a whole lot more interaction, I think, engagement, and making them feel like they are needed, they are wanted, and they are also heard. The power is shifting in whatever industry you look at, not just in sport, but if you look at FMCG, if you look at the banking industry, it's changed so much, and the power is shifting because now there's the consumers actually starting to bundle up together, and they're dictating what they want and what they don't want. And also with COVID, there's a report that was actually taken out in the US to say that people no longer have brand loyalty. They're seeing what works to them and what appeals to them, and they are chopping and changing according to what they want to see. And if it's not working, that they're just moving. So brand loyalty is something that is huge in the sports world. And if you're not retaining that, then that's a really big problem. So interaction, which is as much as you can with your fans, is not only going to help you retain those fans, but it's going to help you as an organization as well to sort of maybe change your pillars if you need to, or see how you can further advance them, or you need to just change with the times, I guess, but in accordance with some of the pillars that you have. But yeah, I totally agree with Mr. Kumete. Fans are important. Listen to the fans, and then they can help you save so much more time with how you communicate with them and how you actually get that engagement going and how you grow that fan base, which is quite important as well. So that's it from my side.
Thank you very much. I know we've just run out of time. I'm just going to allow my CEO, I'm going to put him on the spot, just to give us his final wrap up of the session. Mr. Jono, if you're with us.
Thank you, Wanele, and thank you to all our wonderful speakers this evening, and for all those that tuned in for what is a very important topic as we navigate sport and the business of sport in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Certainly, I think for us as Lions Cricket and really the custodian of cricket within the province, a big mindset shift had to be taken, that we are actually also in the business of cricket. And those business partners, as many have spoken about tonight, are not only looking for a return on investment, but for a return on influence on many levels of the value chain and within the ecosystem. It starts with good governance. It starts with aligning values. It starts with leadership. And it starts with selling a product that people buy into, from your little player and child at 5 or 6 years old right up to your professional. I speak often internally, Wanele will know about the word trust. And I think what fans want, what partners want, and what every role player wants within the business of cricket wants to trust the product that we as Lions Cricket are putting out. And if you build that trust and you align with people along the way with what the vision is, people start to get on your bus and start to get on your journey as you start to deliver on what you promise. And certainly within Lions Cricket, we've been blessed to one, retain amazing partners like Imperial, Enza, Richfield, Sunbet, many others, and also attract new partners in the likes of ADT, Fidelity, and that group, the McDonald's group, and many others. as we journey ahead. And certainly we're blessed within Lions Cricket to have players like Rabada, Bavuma, Van der Dissen, Hendricks, Protea players, and many of our other players. But what we also like to do is tell stories. And it was mentioned tonight that we don't only like to produce good cricketers, but we like to produce good people as well. Within CGL, we also started to frame a narrative from a decision-making point of view, and we really formulated 3 guiding principles in that every decision we take, whether strategic or tactical, will only really be implemented if it aligns with all 3 of those principles. And we broke down CGL into an acronym of choices, governance, and longevity, and unpacked those 3 as a collective group internally. And what we started to do is build the trust with our partners. We started to attract new partners because they saw a change and the impact that we were making, not only on the cricket field, but also off it, with our donation of excess of 5 million rands worth of food parcels through the COVID period, the way we've reached out to families and others in need. And as you start to journey through this with not only a Wanele or Jono or the 80 staff members that are aligned with the vision, but when you start to have Temba Bavuma and a Rabada and a player that jumps onto that bus and starts to walk that journey and that narrative with you, it starts to have people sit up and say, wow, this is a real team. And it's a team from the cubs, the little babies, right up to your professional line side. And you start to tell a story through the journey of cricket and through the business of cricket. So thank you to everyone who partnered with us this evening. Thank you to Richfield, our wonderful partners on this journey, that, as I've always said, are not only looking for return on investment, but for return on influence. To all the partners and to the Momentum group, well done for what you've done for women's cricket. We're also very proud as Lions Cricket to be the first domestic union in the country to issue our women contracts and to start to professionalize the sport. We had Imperial jump on and name our club league the Imperial Women's Premier League to really give some ownership. We had other partners in Black Widow that have sponsored our T20 men's and women's tournaments internally. And there's a real drive to make sure that the women's game is uplifted. In fact, they're in the nets here this evening. I'm still at the stadium. They're in the nets, at the indoor nets here, practicing hard. And we're really trying to elevate the women's game within our ecosystem. And we're certainly excited for the future and look forward to attracting new partners. We look forward to having our existing partners stand by our side through thick and thin. And we really look forward to impacting society and making a meaningful difference through the game of cricket as our medium to change lives. So thank you to everybody. Exciting times are certainly ahead. We've got a lot of good stories to tell in cricket. We've got a lot of good stories to tell as South Africa. And as long as we keep holding hands and driving a common vision of change, I certainly believe that together we can achieve so much. So stay blessed, stay safe, and thanks, Wanza, for allowing me to wrap up.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the end of tonight's topic, and thank you for your contribution, especially to Momentum and all our panelists. We've got a great initiative coming up, which is the G Sports Awards. Please do support, especially in Women's Month. It's something that we are certainly supporting as Lions Cricket. And as John has mentioned earlier, there's a lot of investment that's been put behind not only the Lions Cricket, but the entire transformation platform, which is our blind, deaf cricket, areas in marginalized communities and that. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Hoping we can catch you on the 29th of September. Thank you. Good evening. Cheers.
Good night. Thank you so much. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.